I never believed that light at the end of the tunnel nonsense, where people, having been on the brink of life and death, wake up in a cold sweat, exclaiming, I saw the light. And so, here I am now, in the so-called tunnel, facing this bright light. But the last thing I remember is that I was sleeping in my room, though everyone calls it the king's room. Did someone kill me? I don't remember offending anyone. But on the other hand, when you're an influential public figure, it can be a reason for someone to want to kill you. Anyway, given that I don't seem to be waking up anytime soon and I'm slowly heading toward the bright light, I can probably agree with that, too. The road to light seemed endless. I waited for the children's choir singing an angelic melody and beckoning me to paradise. In return, my vision of everything around me turned into a bright red blur and a sound rushed into my ears. But when I tried to say something, the only thing I could manage was what sounded like crying. I heard muffled sounds that got clearer and clearer, and I heard, congratulations madam, congratulations sir, you have a healthy baby boy, stop. I guess I'm supposed to think through the lines, man, did I just get born? Am I a baby now? But, surprisingly, the only thought that popped into my head was, so the bright light at the end of the tunnel is the light from a woman's moisture. Har har, let's not talk about it anymore. In assessing my situation as a majestic king, I noticed, first of all, that wherever I was born, I understood the language. That's great. Then, slowly and painfully opening my eyes, my retinas were attacked by a variety of vivid images. A doctor, or someone similar, across from me with a not very pretty face, with long graying hair on his head and on his chin. I swear the lenses on his glasses were so thick a bullet wouldn't have penetrated them. The strange thing was that he wasn't wearing a white coat, and we weren't in a room. It seemed as if I had been born in some satanic ritual room, because there were only a couple of candles burning, and we were on the floor. I look around and see a woman pushing me out of the tunnel. It would be fair to call her mom. After watching her look for a few more seconds, I have to admit that she is a beauty. But rather than calling her attractive, I would rather describe her as sweet, fragile, with pronounced golden strands of hair and brown eyes. She is imbued with maternal feelings. Is that how children are attracted to their mothers? I turn my face to the right so I can somehow see the man, obviously my dad, with the idiotic smile and the crying eyes as soon as he sees me. He immediately says, "Hi, little Art, I'm your daddy, can you say daddy?" I look around and see my mother and the house doctor, based on his certificates, rolling their eyes, and my mother manages to grin. "Honey, he was just born." I gaze into my father and understand why my sweet mother loved him. Aside from a couple of blunders he made in asking a newborn to say a two-syllable word, I'll give him the presumption of innocence here, since I think he said it for the joy of fatherhood. He is a very charismatic man, with clearly shaved broad cheekbones. His hair, extremely ash-colored, seemed short, while his eyebrows were wide and stiff. They stuck out like the point of a knife and converged in the middle. But his eyes were kind, maybe because they dipped downward or because they were pure blue, and his pupils radiated a sapphire hue. By the time I was done checking in, I mean considering my parents, their so-called doctor apologized, saying, "Please lie in bed a few more days, Mrs. Lane, and let me know about Arthur's condition, Mr. Levin." For the next couple of weeks after my journey through the tunnel, a new torment began for me. I couldn't control my limbs, I could only wave them around, but even that quickly tired me out. I realized that children have almost no control over their fingers. I don't know how to break it to you guys, but when you run your finger over a child's palm, they grab it not because they love you, but because it's a reflex. Forget about motor skills, I can't even handle my own toilet on my own accord, it just comes out on its own. Har. The only positive thing was that I was breastfed by my mother. Don't get me wrong, nothing more. It's just that breast milk tastes so much better than baby food, and it has more nutritional value. Please believe me. The satanic demon place turned out to be my parents' room, and from this I guess that the place where I am stuck is a place from my old life, but before the invention of electricity. My mother was quick to refute my hopes when she once treated a scratch on my leg when my crazy father slammed me against a shelf. No. Treated not with a band-aid and a kiss, but with the strongest jet of wind, with a little noise she made with her fucking hands. Where the hell am I? My mother, Alice Levy, and my father, Reynold Levy, seem like good people, if not the best. I think my mother is an angel, because I have never met such good-natured people. In the carrier on her back, she and I went into town. This town of Ashbur is more like a settlement, as there are no roads or buildings. We walked along a dirt road, with tents on the sides where vendors sold various things, from basic necessities to things that made me goggle, like weapons, armor, and jewels, shiny jewels. The strangest thing I probably couldn't get used to was people with guns as part of their outfit. I saw a man 170 centimeters tall with a huge military axe, bigger than himself. And my mother kept talking to me, perhaps to teach me to talk faster, while shopping for food, exchanging pleasantries with various people passing by or tent workers. At this time, my body stopped listening to me again, and I fell asleep. To hell with this worthless body. Sitting on my mother's lap, who cradled me on her chest, I was focused on my father, who hummed a melody of joy that resembled a prayer to the earth. I leaned closer and closer, almost falling off my heel while I waited for some magical phenomenon, like an earthquake splitting the earth or a stone giant appearing. The time lasted infinity, believe me, an infant whose attention span is like a goldfish. 3 huge boulders emerged from the ground and struck a tree up close. What is the name of what happened? I threw my hands up in anger and regret, but my crazy dad explained it as wow, and a wide grin appeared on his face as if to say, your daddy's awesome. No, my father was an even more posh warrior. When he wore 2 iron gloves, even I forced myself to throw off my underwear, a diaper, for him. Lively in a way that was surprising for his constitution, his fists could break the sound barrier, but also smooth enough to leave no gaps. In my world he might have been counted among the elite, the leader of a squad of 100 soldiers, but to me he was my crazy father. I realized that this world seems to be a fairly open world of magic and warriors, where power and affluence determine your position in society. In any sense, it's not very different from my world, except for the lack of technology and the slight difference between magic there and here. In my old world, wars were an almost obsolete form of conflict resolution between countries. Don't get me wrong, of course, there were occasional small-scale battles, and the army was needed to protect the citizens. However, problems concerning the welfare of a country were based on non-lethal combat between the leaders of the country, limited to the use of key and melee weapons, or a tactical exercise between troops where a limited number of firearms were allowed, for minor conflicts. Thus, kings were not typical fat men sitting on a throne and ignorantly giving orders, but they had to be strong, intelligent men in order to represent their country. The currency of this new world was quite clear, based on the exchanges my mother made with merchants. Copper is the cheapest currency, then silver, then gold. I have yet to see something that is worth more than a gold coin. It seems to be enough for ordinary families to have a couple of copper coins a day. 100 copper equals 1 silver, 100 silver equals 1 gold. Each day included chanting my body, working on the motor skills deep within me. But one day everything changed. I was a king. I could raise an entire army at my own doorstep with a snap of my fingers. I fought my rivals from different countries to resolve conflicts and maintain my reputation. In terms of weaponry and key control I was the best, and because of that I became ruler in my former world. Kings are not born, they are made. Nevertheless, I was truly proud of myself now. I learned to crawl. I used to have to settle for my mother's stories when she tried to make me sleep. I grumbled grudgingly when she stopped the story. My father would sometimes sit me on his lap and tell me lazily about his old days, and it made me think of the world I was in and what it was filled with. Reynolds Laven, a former adventurer, apparently everyone did it in his world, with a vast knowledge of the field. He was part of several teams going on treasure hunts and missions from the Guild of Adventurers. Eventually he met my mother and they settled down in the town of Walden, which is on the border of the kingdom. He proudly told me how my mother fell head over heels in love with him when he first visited the town's Adventurers Guild where she worked. But I think it was the other way around, since my mother gave him a smack and told him to stop lying to Art. By the way, my name is Arthur Laven. Art, for short. Too cute a name for a former king, but, looking into that sheet of metal they use as a bathroom mirror, I did look pretty damn cute. I got my thick brown hair from my mom and my bright azure eyes from my dad. I don't know how my facial features will change as I get older, but as long as I'm not fat, I'll be fine. Watch out, ladies in the future. Get ready to have your heart broken. For weeks I tried to learn to crawl, but only tossed and turned. But when I succeeded, I crawled into the family library while my mother hung the laundry out to dry. That day my mother saw me and, with a sigh, said, "Yeah, you're going to be just as hard to deal with as your father was." I closed closed the encyclopedia and made myself comfortable by rolling over on my stomach, since crawling and sitting was rather tiring. In thinking over what I've just read, I've come to the conclusion that this world is not that advanced, from which I can deduce that there was not much technology in it. The only sources of transportation were horses and ships with sails. Guns were allowed and could be carried freely, except when visiting royalty or authority figures. God, I never cease to be amazed every time I see armed people in a store. Of course, in my world too, there were soldiers and guards who had concealed weapons, but they used them not to kill, but to prevent crime. But the other day I saw a thief who had stolen a few things from a gun shop get hacked in half by a huge, bold mercenary with a spear. And other citizens even applauded him. But both worlds were similar in the system of monarchy. On this continent, Decatan, there were kingdoms, each with a king who ruled the state along with his family. Unlike in my world, here the king was chosen from a lineage descending from the king's son, his son, and so on. In my study of the encyclopedia, I noticed no mention of other continents than this one. This is strange, since the native people had ships that transported goods and passengers along rivers, but perhaps the technology here is not yet advanced enough to allow ships to cross the oceans. The only thing that would be difficult to get used to was the magic of this world. Of course, when it comes to supernatural powers, my land had them, too. In my world, practitioners of magic learned to condense and use the innate ki that was in their body. It was very much like a muscle, breaking the center of ki and letting it rest strengthened ki, increasing in volume. Ki spread throughout the body and strengthened the body. In this world, ki is called mana, and more surprisingly, it existed in the atmosphere of this planet. Thus, practitioners and mags used the surrounding mana and absorbed it into the mana cores in their bodies. In my former life, ki only existed inside the body. Whether it ever existed in Earth's atmosphere or disappeared due to pollution, no one knew that. At a time when practice over innate ki center was incredibly important, because the more energy in you the better, here the mana core doesn't matter much, because the atmosphere is full of mana. In my old world, even though my ki center was not very big, I was considered a prodigy in controlling and effectively using my ki to compensate for my center. The way I used every bit of my ki allowed me to become the strongest in the elite duelist division, earning the right to become king. Now that I still know how to practice and use ki, can I use innate core mana to strengthen myself by a factor of 2 or 3? Asterisk, a beginner's guide for privileged magicians. While control of mana is transmitted primarily by genes, there have been many cases where children of mags have been unable to sense the mana around them. The latest census shows that about 1 in 100 children can sense mana, but this can only be tested when the mana core is fully formed, i.e., during the periods of late childhood and early adolescence. It is known that magic in bodies awakens when the nucleus is fully formed. This leads to the formation of a translucent barrier around the awakening, which disappears after a few minutes. As I flip through the pages, I find something that catches my attention. Mana can be used in several ways. 2 of them are the most common and are used in strengthening the body by using mana, augmenters, and throwing it into the outside world, spellcasters. Augmenters are the most common type of warrior, who gather mana and direct it along their body, strengthening it for an attack. Spellcasters can use mana to cast spells that apply to an area or a specific target. Disadvantages and limitations. While the augmenter has incredible strength, protection, and agility, their speed leaves much to be desired. Spellcasters possess unfathomable powers and can alter the battlefield to suit their conditions. However, even such powers have limitations. Unlike other mags, who use most of their mana from their core, spellcasters must draw mana from their surroundings in addition to their own reserves in order to cast their spells. While both kinds of mags, or mana manipulators, in the scientific sense, are classified by their mana core, augmenters and spellcasters also have their own different ways of evaluating their abilities. Asterisk D turned it over D in augmenters. Skill is measured by the power of the mana channels in the body, which quickly and efficiently direct mana from the core to various parts of the body. In spellcasters, on the other hand, talent is measured by the power of mana flowing through their veins, which shows how fast and efficiently mana from the world around them can be absorbed. Asterisk D turned it over D. Magicians, mana manipulators, usually belong to these 2 divisions, for it is incredibly difficult and inefficient to try to master both. Most people are born with a big difference among their mana channels or mana veins. Augmenters don't need strong mana veins because they mostly use their core mana, while spellcasters don't really need strong mana channels because they don't rely on mana in their bodies. So that means that my fool of a father is more suited to augmenters than spellcasters. What a healing light. Is that my mom? *D flips through Diagar. There are several kinds of exceptions. There are still a few mags in the world who are unexplored, those who are more highly regarded. Emitters, better known as healers. Healers have the rare ability to restore mana to others, healing injuries and wounds. Wow, my mom is the best. The basics of witchcraft. The initial steps in gathering mana for spellcasters would be to capture mana from the surrounding area, turn it into your core in order to stabilize and purify it, and then channel it into the appropriate conductor, staff, wand, ring, etc., with mental control and the order to change your mana into the spell you want. *D turned it over D. The more powerful the spell, the more time it will take to gather the surrounding mana, place it in the core and release it. *D turned it over D. Since spellcasting involves focusing mana into a spell, mags have a special leaning toward the basic elements: air, water, fire, earth. But with the right training, a spellcaster can master all elements. *D flips through D. Fundamentals of augmentation. Unlike spellcasters, augmenters spend much less time gathering ambient mana. Effective use of augmentation requires speed of precision in using mana from their core, not relying on mana in the atmosphere. Something clicked in my head. Augmentation was closer to the way we used ki, except that you can get mana from your surroundings. The reason there were no spellcasters in my world was the lack of mana in the planet's atmosphere. My gaze strained and I read on. Augmentation requires the proper distribution of mana in different parts of the body. Although it seems simple, augmentation requires a deep understanding of one's own body structure. Knowing how to use mana channels effectively requires many years of both mental and physical practice. *D turned it over D. Because augmentation involves the user's mana core, the effectiveness of pure mana is not as different as that of normal mana. However, augmented mags can manage their mana as they wish, gaining more attacking abilities as a result. *D turned it over D. This phenomenon is called reaction, and it occurs in both types of magic. For augmentations, it happens from depletion of the mana core, resulting in extremely painful bodily damage, depending on how much damage the mana core has sustained. In spellcasters, the reaction occurs when the mana core is overpowered. It occurs when an overpowered spell is summoned that is beyond the summoner's strength. After closing the book, I sat back down and began to digest the information I had just read. Because of the striking similarities between the key center of my old world and the mana core of this one, it was hard for me to believe that it was possible to manipulate mana as a teenager. In my old world, people began to meditate and sense their own ki as children. Once ki is concentrated, it forms into a center. Testing my hypothesis, I began to meditate, trying to feel the mana in my 7-month-old body, when... There you are. Art, honey, are you having problems with your CACA? Mom, I'm going to be the greatest wizard in the world, and you make me look like some constipated baby. Taking me in her arms and laying me down gently, she forcibly carried me off to change my diaper, which, to my surprise, was full. On behalf of Alice Levine, Arthur is the prettiest kid in the world, and I'm not saying that as a caring mother. No. He, with his wisp of bright brown hair and playful eyes that almost seem to radiate blue light, seems almost intelligent at times. No, I'm not telling you this as a loving mother. I plan to be a strict and conventional mother. I can't rely entirely on my husband to teach art, thanks to common sense. God, he tried to teach his child to fight when he could barely crawl. I know that this little rascal, like his father, will do mischief as soon as I turn my back. The moment he started crawling, I was so proud, literally sobbing, but I can't even imagine how proud he is of himself now that he's starting to move around on his own. I swear, there hasn't been a day since then when I've barely looked away and he's already crawling into the library. It's kind of weird. We bought him a lot of toy animals and other toys, but he always came back to the library. He certainly didn't get that from his father, for Reynolds is literally repelled by some unknown force from texts longer than the weekly paper. Seeing how happy he gets when we go out on the town, I decided to go shopping every day instead of twice a week. No, I told you, I'm not a loving mother. It's just to familiarize him with the outside world and get fresh food in the house. Yeah, har, there you go. My son seems to be interested in almost everything. His disproportionately large head turns left and right, trying to see everything going on around him. He seems particularly interested in his father's practices. Reynolds used to be a good adventurer. To get a Class B at his age is not for everyone. To become even a Class E, the lowest adventurer, you have to pass a test to weed out the ignorant adolescents rushing to their deaths. As for high-ranking ones, I've seen a couple of class adventurers in all my time in the guild and never saw a single class S, thinking they didn't even exist. Working for the Adventurers Guild, or just the guild, back then in Walden, I saw a lot of teenagers who had their egos just fogged up their heads. At least they had ambition. Once, I was assigned to be the caretaker for a basic practical exam, where the test subject must demonstrate basic skills in mana manipulation, but before the test even began, the guy collapsed right on his back because the sword he was carrying was too heavy for him. As a matter of fact, Reynolds looked exactly the same. As soon as he saw me, his jaw dropped, and he froze in place until the guy behind him elbowed him. He wiped away his drool and muttered, "Hi, can I get stuff for the assignment?" I just snorted as he blushed with embarrassment like a tomato. He was able to muster up all his courage to ask me out to dinner, and we immediately ran out of there. Even now, I can't help but smile when I see his puppy dog blue-eyed look. Art took trays from both of us, which made him even cuter. You have to see him when I have to change his diapers. I don't know why, but his cheeks turn red and he covers his face with his tiny fingers. Maybe all the kids his age are ashamed, too. The next note in my baby journal, which is for educational purposes only because I'm not a loving mother, was the first time he said, "Mom." He said, "Mom." I made him say, "Mom," over and over again, just to make sure I hadn't misheard him. Reynolds sulked all day because Art said, "Mom," instead of "Dad." Har har, I won. The rest of the year passed quietly. My son was always with me wherever I went, and sometimes he would look out the window, watching his father practice after dinner. I'm glad Reynolds gave up his dream of being an adventurer and took over as guardian of our town. Adventurism can bring in a lot of money, but for me, knowing that my husband is alive and coming home is dearer. Luckily, little Art was never sick, but sometimes I noticed him sitting with his eyes closed. At first I thought I was just winding myself up, but it happened more than once. It's weird, and I don't know how to fix it. I thought kids his age were supposed to be energetic, but after his escapades to the library, he would sit in one place for a long time, as if meditating. At first I was concerned about it, but these occasions only happened a couple of times a day and lasted a few minutes, and afterwards Art seemed to get happier. The way he holds his hands funny and looks at me makes me want to bite him with happiness. I'm not a caring mother. On behalf of Arthur Laven, it's been over 2 years since I made my arduous journey to the library. Since then, I've been constantly trying to gather bits and pieces of mana and spread it out in my body so I can concentrate them and try to form a core of mana. I have to say, it's quite a slow and difficult task. It's easier to learn to walk on your hands and eat with your feet than it is to collect mana in that damn body. Now I understand why the book says that a person needs to reach at least adolescence in order to awaken. If I let the mana particles move around in my body on their own, it would take at least 10 years for them to attract each other and take on the shape of a mana core. However, I have the mind of an adult, which means I can consciously put my mana particles together. This is exactly what I did as a child, in my former life, where young people were still taught in schools to control ki. Basically, you have to be able to feel the ki, or mana, in your body and make it connect together near the solar plexus. If you leave them alone, the particles will end up sailing slowly toward each other anyway, but I'll make them speed up, figuratively speaking of course. The daily rituals consisted of trying to expend a fair amount of my energy on gathering the surrounding mana and avoiding unnecessary attention from my mother and father. My father seemed to think that throwing a baby in the air would be quite enjoyable for him. I realized that this is a kind of adrenaline effect that can excite some people, but when his hands are fortified with mana and toss me into the air, I fly like a shell, feeling nauseous and getting a traumatic fear of heights. Luckily, my mother kept my father on his toes, sometimes even frightening me. I often catch her looking at me, drooling as if I were some kind of high-grade meat. I tried to adjust to my body and said some very simple phrases. After the first time I said, "Mom," to let her know I wanted to eat, she almost cried with joy. From then on, I just needed to talk to get some attention. Although the pace of learning was strenuous and slow, I got a pretty big head start on the rest of the people, so I wasn't really complaining. I was about halfway through collecting mana particles. These past 2 years had not been wasted, for I had finally collected all my mana in the solar plexus and condensed it into a mana core when, boom! On behalf of Reynolds Levy, my baby, I was so happy when our son was born. When will I be able to teach him? Damn, I can't wait to teach my kid the basics of magic. I hope he becomes an augmenter, just like his old dad. I know the basics of spells, but I won't be able to put any of that into practice. But Alice is one of the most talented people I've ever seen. Even among the emitters, she's special. Then, after she agreed to go out with me, we teamed up as a team and went on a mission. Her restorative abilities were amazing on their own, but I was blown away by the way she used spells to heal several allies at once. And I became her husband. Hee hee. I still can't believe it. A long time ago, before Alice asked us to stop being adventurous, we used to go to the beast fields and hunt mana beasts. These beasts were unique creatures, born with the ability to absorb mana and create a mana core called the beast core. Beast kernels are used almost everywhere, which makes them very useful and highly valued. Of course, the higher the class of the beast, the more valuable its core. Mana beasts start with class E, regular bulls used for maso and skin, and go all the way up to class SS monsters. I can't say anything about them, since I haven't personally seen them or heard of their existence. As a rule, mana beasts are stronger than humans in the same class, because even ordinary beasts are stronger than ordinary humans. Though the beasts in the glades were dangerous, but as long as you're careful, you won't get into trouble. The stronger animals live in the dungeons, so if you are a C-class adventurer, you can walk a dozen kilometers through the glades without any problem. Every few months there are tasks that require several teams of adventurers. Usually it was necessary to clear the dungeons and map their passages, because they are not yet fully explored. If a mana beast is strong enough to create its own lair and make other monsters serve itself, then be assured that you will get a good reward for killing it. I tell my son Art all about my life as an adventurer, counting on him to have some adventurous experience before he grows up. I don't know what will happen if little Art never wakes up. God, it doesn't matter how long it takes, as long as he can train to be a mage, I'll be the happiest father in the world. It's fairly easy to predict what type of mage an awakened mage will become, since augmenters and spellcasters have different translucent barriers that appear during awakening. Augmenters, during awakening, form a sort of repulsive barrier, which denotes the dominant mana channels in their body. Spellcasters, on the contrary, literally attract everything around them, which means that there are more mana veins in their body. The degree of repulsion and attraction depends on the talent of the awakener. I don't want to brag, but I woke up when I was 12 years old. I was lying on the bed at the time, when suddenly an unknown force pushed me away from it and held me in the air for 2 minutes. Shit, Alice should be grateful that I stopped being adventurous and settled down without using my talents to the fullest, but don't tell Mom that. Anyway, as soon as he wakes up, I'll start training him. If he becomes a spellcaster, I'll hire him a tutor, because I don't have enough experience to teach him. That's what I said, but boom! More than half of the house literally disappeared. What happened? Fortunately, I was resting with Alice in the yard, but little Art was in the house. Arthur. Alice's pale face is all bloody, and she walks into the house, worried about her son. I throw a temporary shield over my wife that will protect her for at least a few minutes. I rush toward the explosion, covering my body with layers of mana. The wreckage of what's left of my house keeps falling, preventing me from making my way to the source of the explosion. As I dashed through the rubble, I saw it. My son was alive, and there was a noticeable translucent barrier around him. The repulsive force of the awakening barrier was so great that it caused an explosion. He was hovering in the center of the crater where the house used to stand. Har har. My legs buckled and I fell to my knees, but I still continued to stare at the sight. My son is almost 3 years old, and he's already awake. Only 3. I don't know whether to laugh or cry. Reynolds. Honey. I looked at my wife, and my jaw was still trembling with shock. She walked slowly toward me through the piles of garbage. She was already halfway to me and was covering her face with her hands to protect herself from the violent repulsion that was coming from Art. Reynolds. What's the matter? What's going on? Where's Art? I was still reeling from the shock and pointed my finger at our son. She looked where I was pointing and slowly whispered, "My God." On behalf of Arthur Laven, wow. I feel great. I closed my eyes to feel my newly formed mana core again. My little mana core. Art. Oh, my baby. Are you okay? I saw my mother rushing toward me while my father was on his knees. What did he do this time that made his mother punish him? Mom picked me up and hugged me so tightly that my ribs almost cracked. Mom, don't cry. What's wrong? I managed to mutter. She didn't answer and continued sobbing, clutching me. My father came over to us, put his arm around her back, and stroked my head, smiling weakly. After a moment of confusion, I yanked my head away from my mother's chest and looked around to see us standing in the center of a giant crater at the site of our home. What the fuck? Who did this? Who dared to destroy the king's house? The guilty will regret this day. I will hunt them day and night and will not rest until. Congratulations, Art, you're awake. Did I do that? In my old world, a similar phenomenon occurs when a teenager awakens. A barrier appears around him that repels everything around him. It seems that in this world the repulsive force is many times stronger because of the atmospheric manner, which was not present on my Earth. I decided to apologize for this situation. Forgive me. Is it my fault? Har har, no, Art, it wasn't your fault. We were just worried about you. I'm glad you're okay, my mother managed to say through her tears. However, my idiot father seemed to be very happy. My son is a genius. He woke up at almost 3 years old. This is unprecedented. I thought I was the one who woke up before anyone else, but, my God. But the touching moment was broken when a passing neighbor shouted, "What in the name of all things happened?" Har har, we better clean this place up, my father grinned, rubbing the back of his head. It had been a couple of weeks since my awakening. We decided to keep it a secret. My father contacted a couple of his former adventurous friends to help rebuild our house while we lived in the hotel next door. The spellcasters lifted the ground for the foundation, and the augmenters did all the hard work. At this rate, it won't take long to rebuild the house. That's the magic. Amazingly, none of my father's friends even asked why our house was blown up. That speaks volumes about my idiot father's serious past. While our house was being rebuilt, it was my birthday. My parents woke me up early in the morning and gave me a box and bread. It was a cake. I would have guessed right away if it hadn't been black. When I opened the gift, I found a neat wooden sword inside. I hugged my parents and thanked them for the gift and the cake. This surprised me a lot, because my parents hadn't celebrated my last 2 birthdays, so I thought it wasn't celebrated in this world at all. Later I learned that traditionally birthdays are only celebrated from the age of 3, because a long time ago little children died quickly. This is the Middle Ages. I was interested in one thing that I noticed quite recently. Seeing children and teenagers working with their families on household chores or forging iron as apprentices in blacksmiths got me thinking that there is no structured education system in this world. The family provided them with some basic knowledge, mostly in reading and writing. As soon as I turned 3, my mother herself started teaching me to read and write. Playing the part of a genius son, I pretended that I was just a fast learner, so I could read heavy books in the library without attracting attention. After waking up, my father began to teach me the basics of magic and made me practice. He tried to simplify things as best he could so that even a toddler could understand, but I guess if it weren't for my abilities, even as an adult I wouldn't have quite understood him. The basics were as follows. A simple way to know your power is to look at the color of your mana core. At first it is black, due to body blood and other impurities that appear when mana particles are mixed together. When the mana inside a person becomes more pure and the impurities are filtered out, the core changes color to a dark red. Therefore, the lighter the mana core, from dark red to red and then to light red, the stronger the possessor of the core. The order of colors is as follows: black, red, orange, yellow, silver, and then white. From red core to yellow, the color is divided into 3 shades. As a rule, the brighter the shade, the purer the mana in the core and the stronger the owners become. My father's lessons were helpful, and I listened to him obediently. A few days later I asked my mother, "Mom, can you buy me books on magic?" Since my mother still had connections in the Adventurers Guild, she managed to acquire a pretty good collection of books on the basics of mana manipulation, as well as a few weapon tutorials. Some of the books had pictures and simple words. The information in them was abbreviated, and I ignored them. My mother looked at me strangely because the books I was studying were pretty high level for a beginner. She assumed I wouldn't even be able to understand most of the words and tried to suggest simpler books, saying they would be easier for me to understand, but still, in the end, she backed off. Every day I learned to read and write with my mother and additionally trained with my father. After he explained the basic theories and practices of augmentation, we began real training. Looking at my small weak body, not suitable for sparring, we started body training. I think seeing a 3-year-old trying to do push-ups would have made my father laugh, but he got over himself and held back his laughter. When I'm free from class, I usually lock myself in the library, reading and thinking about how I could improve my mana core. A year passed in an inquiring routine, and one night at dinner my father said, "Honey, I think we need to hire a good mentor for our art." Mom dropped her fork on the plate and that asterisk ding asterisk silence was drowned out. What? Reynolds. Arthur's not even 4 yet. No. Besides, you said our son was an augmenter, so I thought you were going to teach him yourself. I didn't expect our son to be such a prodigy at manipulating manner. I had never heard of waking up at 3 years old. But that means he has to leave the house. He's only 4, Reynolds. We can't let our baby out of the house this early. You don't understand. Seeing the way he meditates, I think it would do him good. Alice, dear, I just want him to learn what I don't know. So my parents had a fight. They went back and forth, mostly talking about the same thing. Mom said I was too young, and Dad said they should let me reach my potential. Meanwhile, I was playing war with my food, where the beans attacked the mother empire while the carrots of the father nation desperately defended their borders. Finally, my parents calmed down, and my father asked, Art, this concerns you, too, so your word is important, too. What do you think about going to the capital and signing up for a teacher? Unbelievable. I appreciate your attempts to resolve your argument fairly, but do you realize that you're forcing a 4-year-old to make a decision that will ultimately change his life? Trying to end their quarrel, I said, can I try to meet with a mentor to see if I need to learn or not? Asterisk D silence D. Did I do something wrong? Should I not have voiced that suggestion at that age? Or are they angry because I didn't choose their side? I tried to keep my composure and looked at them, waiting for an answer. Fortunately, they didn't think anything of it. Well, at least he has his manor core and his channels checked. We can figure out what to do. My father nodded in agreement, and we began to prepare for tomorrow's trip. When I suggested it, I thought we'd get to the next town in a day and have a qualified midge check me out, but man, was I wrong. We were preparing for a 3-week journey. A horse-drawn carriage ride through some bloody majestic mountains to a town called Xyrus. A book I recently read came to my mind. I remember that it described a floating city built by an elite organization of spellcasters for the sole purpose of maintaining the Academy of Mags. The city was built around it, and so both it and the Academy were named after the leader of the organization, Xaruz. How is it possible to lift a piece of Earth 100 kilometers into the air? Magnetism. But then the ground beneath the city would also be affected. Does the city have its own gravitational field? Whatever. It's going to be a long journey. It's times like these that I wish they had invented more modern transportation before now. To get to the city, we need to go through the teleportation gates in the mountains. Otherwise the journey could take months to reach the city, which floats near the borders of the kingdoms of Sapin and Dar. One of the reasons my father made us leave immediately for the trip was because that's where his adventurer friends were going. So now we had 3 augmenters, 2 spellcasters, and my mother, who was a very rare emitter. Although there were no strong manor beasts on the mountain ranges, there was still the danger of encountering bandits and wild animals. While my mom and dad packed everything I needed, I packed my wooden sword and 2 books with me for the trip, the Didactin Encyclopedia, and the Basics of Mana Manipulation. In the morning, we were ready to go. Tying my bag of books and snacks behind my back and strapping my sword to my belt, I held my mother's hand and watched my parents greet their former allies. Although my father told me about them from time to time, I had never been to the site of the rebuilding of our house, so this was the first time I had seen them. From what I understand, my father's 2 horns team included Eleanor, the Shard, a female augmenter who specializes in magical shooting. Adam, Crash, the male augmenter who wielded the spear. Jasmine, Flaming Sword, female augmenter who specializes in speed attacks with 2 daggers. Angela, Rose, a female spellcaster who specializes in aerial magic. Durder, Wanderer, a male spellcaster who specializes in earth magic. We got to the inn and saw them in the stable. My father, hugging his former team members, exclaimed, "Guys, I want you to meet my son Arthur. Come over here, Art, introduce yourself." I bowed a little and introduced myself. "Greetings. My father has told me much about his colleagues at the 2 Horns. Thank you for traveling with us as far as Zaruz." "Ha ha ha ha, what is that? Such manners. Are you sure this is your son, Ray?" It was Spearman Adam who laughed. Looking at him, he seemed an energetic and talkative type. With a rather pleasant appearance, with bright red hair, almost fiery, with bangs and a tie, he resembled an ordinary hobo. His eyes were bright and seemed to be literally laughing. The first thing I noticed right away, though, was the scar on his nose stretching across both cheeks. "Oh, isn't he cute? You should be glad he doesn't look like you, Reynolds." Suddenly I felt like I had been grabbed and was trying to strangle me between 2 giant breasts. I looked at the woman trying to kill me. Damn, she was beautiful. Not as beautiful as my mother, but quite similar to a princess, with her long blonde hair and bright green eyes. As my body nearly crumbled and my face nearly crushed between two hills, a strong hand grabbed my bag and carried me away from this insatiable woman. "Angela, you're hurting him." As I hovered like a kitten caught by the scruff of my neck, I turned my gaze to the giant. He lifted me easily to a height of 2 meters, set me back down, and smoothed my clothes. Caring giant. Could I ride all the way on his shoulders? I looked at him, and my eyes literally widened and sparkled. I felt safer with him by my side. He had very narrow eyes and low-set eyebrows, under which he had an almost innocent face. The short and groomed hair on his head completed his image as a shaggy dog. After fixing my clothes, I turned to the woman, who looked slightly younger than the others. She had straight black hair tied up with a ribbon, red, half-open eyes, and a slight smile that made her look rather cheeky. She nods slightly, then looks away. Oh, the silent woman. That's so sweet. As I watched her walk away toward the stables, I noticed 2 short daggers that were tied just above her hips. The last member of the 2 Horns team was Elena, the Shard. She stroked my head and gave me a slight, charming smile. Elena could be described in one word: sharp. Sharp eyes, a sharp, upturned nose, thin red lips, and flat, almost boyish breasts. Her hair reached to her shoulders and was tied tightly back. I was fascinated by her charisma. She even seemed to exude something of "we can do anything we believe in," and almost glowed. Light leather armor covered her bust, and her bow and arrow were strapped to her back, so I couldn't help but compare her to an elf, though I quickly dismissed the thought after seeing her rounded ears. I strengthened my legs with manner and jumped onto the cart. Lately I'd learned to strengthen my body with manner, although I didn't have a chance to test what I was capable of. So as not to shock my parents, I tried to imitate a normal kid and redirected mana from my core into my channels. After our team had loaded everything we needed into the wagons, we strapped on what I called horses. It turns out that in this world, the manor beasts domesticated for transportation are called skitters. These giant lizards with spikes on their backs and powerful claws of Class D monsters were far more efficient and expensive than horses at traveling over mountain terrain. Let the journey begin. By nightfall, the mountain range in the distance seemed to have doubled in size. I wonder how big it will be when we reach the bottom. Unbelievable. We set up camp on a small cluster of boulders. There were a lot of fallen branches nearby that could be used for a fire. I hate this body for how much sleep it requires. I slept most of the way and still felt a little sleepy. After pitching the tents around the fire, my father and mother began chatting with the 2 Horns crew about the old days, when Elena sat down next to me and said, "I heard your father say that you were some kind of genius magician. Is it true that you have already awakened?" Not knowing how to answer her, I just told her the truth. Yes. She started asking me how I felt after I woke up and what color my mana core was. By this time, Adam overheard our conversation and said, "Hey, Reynolds, do you mind if I test little art?" Both my parents seemed to hesitate a little at first, but trusting their old comrade, my father said, "All right, but be careful. I haven't had time to teach him how to fight. For now, we're learning light stretching and a few mana exercises." Adam got up from his makeshift stump seat, looked around, and found a short stick. "Come here, kid. Har har, let's see what you're made of." I don't know if he was trying to teach a kid who had an inflated ego from being recognized as a genius or if he was genuinely trying to test my strength, but from his smug grin and the way he looked down on me, even if it was just for physical reasons, it still pissed me off. I thought it might have been something personal. Picking up the wooden sword my parents had given me, I walked to the edge of the camp, where Adam was already waiting for me. "You know how to fortify your weapons, don't you, genius?" By this time my father felt that Adam just wanted to show off for the baby, but just watched the whole thing, knowing that he wouldn't hurt his child too much. "Thank you so much, Daddy." My mom was still a little worried about me and kept glancing over at Adam, me, and my dad, holding onto his sleeve. "At least Mom can heal me if I get hurt, right?" I focused my gaze on Adam. Images from my past life duels with other kings from my country appeared in my mind. My eyes narrowed. He was my opponent now. I threw my mana on my feet and rushed forward, clutching the wooden sword to my right with both hands. Still smiling smugly, Adam was preparing to block my horizontal kick when I lunged to the right and pulled my special leg move, which I'd invented in my old world and used in duels. Almost instantly, I swung my leg diagonally to the right. Damn this body. I couldn't execute the lunge perfectly because the difference in weight and height was too high. I wasn't used to this 20-pound, 110-centimeter body. Unfortunately for Adam, he had already prepared to reflect my lunge with his wooden stick and his right side was exposed. His smug look was almost gone, and he wondered, realizing what was about to happen. As I swung the wooden sword across his exposed torso, I strengthened my sword with manner at the last moment, as I realized that I was now at quite a disadvantage to the battle veteran. Adam's surprise lasted only a split second before he swung his right leg with almost inhuman speed. I squatted down in time to dodge the blow, and attacked his ankle with all my might. That punch should knock him off balance. That's what I thought. He actually sat on the twine, but as soon as Adam was on the ground, he immediately flailed his legs. This body was in no condition to take such a blow, so I jumped up to dodge his feet, and at the edge of my peripheral vision saw a wooden stick flying at me. I didn't have time to use the point of my sword to block, and so I had to stick the hilt of my sword under a blow that would surely knock the sword out of my hand. Suddenly, Newton's third law came to mind: for every action there is an equal counteraction. And damn it, that countermeasure was quite painful. While I successfully blocked the blow, my 4-year-old body failed to withstand the force and flew across the ground like pebbles across a lake. Luckily, I strengthened my entire body with manner, otherwise serious injuries would have been unavoidable. Grunting, I sat up and rubbed my throbbing head. Looking toward the camp, I saw 7 faces staring at me stupidly. My mother was the quickest to come to her senses. She rushed to me and immediately murmured a healing spell. "Art, honey, are you okay? How are you feeling?" "I'm fine, Mom. Don't worry." Adam's voice pierced the silence. "Didn't teach him to fight, huh? How come? How the hell did you teach that little monster?" "I didn't teach him that," my father managed to mutter. He shook himself out of his stupor, came up to me, and asked me if everything was okay. I just nodded my head in response. He took me in his arms and put me where I used to sit. Squatting down beside me so that our eyes were on the same level, my father asked, "Art, where did you learn to fight like that?" Determined to play up my ignorance, I made the most innocent face and said, "I learned it by reading books and watching you, Dad." I don't think if I said, "Hey Dad, I was the dueling king," representing my country from a world where all diplomacy was decided in battles. Suddenly, I was your son. Surprise, would have had more success with him. Sorry about the wounds, kid. I didn't expect I'd have to use so much strength to beat you. Adam's apology allowed me to adjust my impressions of him better. Now I thought he wasn't exactly a jerk. A faint voice came from my side. "Your fighting style is unique. How did you pull off that trick?" Wow. 2 whole sentences. This is the longest speech from Jasmine on our entire trip. I feel like I deserve it. Thank you. After putting my thoughts in order, I tried to explain what I had done step by step. Actually, it's a pretty simple technique. Because I made Mr. Crash's deceptive maneuver, his right side was left unprotected, so I put my right foot forward to start the feint. Then I instantly concentrated my manner in it, pushing myself backward and at the same time putting my left leg behind my right, pointing it where I wanted to turn. Concentrating even more manner into my left leg, I pushed myself back and turned it sideways. It was incredible. I looked around and saw Adam, Helen, and even my father trying to comprehend what I had just said. When I turned toward Jasmine, she was already running into the clearing to check it out. My mother sat beside me, stroking my head and smiling softly, as if to say, "You did well." Angela came up to me, literally jamming her breasts into my face and exclaiming happily, "So cute and talented. Why weren't you born sooner?" Blushing, I forced myself to move farther away from those breasts, suspecting that they had their own gravitational field. These weapons are quite dangerous. My guardian angel, Durden, was much calmer than the others and just gave me the thumbs up. He's so cool. All night long, 4 jerks tried to master my feint while I slept in the tent with my mom. After a couple of days, we finally reached the foot of Big Mountain, which lived up to its name. Along the way, Elena managed to tame her pride and asked me to explain the step feint. I slowly explained what the spacing should be between your right foot and your left foot, how to properly balance the mana output to both feet so that you could roll to where you needed to go. All the while I watched the other 3 idiots listening carefully, trying to absorb the information and taking notes in their minds. The first successes were Jasmine's. She seemed cold, but brilliant. I suppose that was true. One day when I was learning to read and write in the cart, she came up to me and, blushing, asked me to look at her. We had to stop, so the carts didn't get away from us. After the successful demonstration of the step feint, I applauded and said, "Amazing. You learned it so fast." Although it was one of the easiest techniques I had developed, I didn't tell her about it. Nothing, she answered briefly. But the smile and the slight, proud twitch of her nose proved otherwise. Har har, she was happy. When we arrived at the foot of Big Mountain, all four underdogs had managed to master the technique, changing it slightly to suit their own fighting style. The next step in our journey was up the mountain. Fortunately, there was a way that our two wide wagons, circling around the mountain, could eventually reach the teleportation gate at the top. Durden sat in the front of the cart and held the reins, and my father kept him company. Inside the cart was most of our belongings. Helena stood on the roof of the second wagon, watching the area. Angela sat next to me and my mother, and Adam walked behind, guarding the rear. As Jasmine steered our wagon, I noticed her glance at me from time to time. Was she expecting me to show her other tricks or something? Every time I noticed her stare, she immediately looked back. By the way, I was for when we wandered the foot of Big Mountain. I don't know when Mom made the cake or where she got it, and it was quite edible, but I didn't complain and thanked her and everyone else with a big smile. While everyone gave me a hug or a pat on the back, Jasmine surprised me when she handed me a dagger and simply said, "A gift." Oh, she takes care of me. It brought tears to my eyes. Our trip up the mountain was pretty boring. I spent a lot of time reading my book on mana manipulation, trying to find any discrepancies between mana and ki. So far they seemed very similar, except on the rare occasions when augmenter's mana can take on the properties of the elements. As I read on, I noticed that with newcomers it is not so noticeable, but with spellcasters it is clearly evident when they choose the magic of an individual element. For example, an augmenter, if he has an innate compatibility with fire, will have mana with explosive qualities. Water, on the other hand, will have smoother and more flexible qualities. Earth will be hard and rigid, while wind will be sharp as blades. It's strange. In my old world, the qualities of ki had nothing to do with the elements, only how you use it. Shaping ki with sharp edges could be called an air element, and storing energy at one point and bursting it at the last moment could be called a fire element, and so on. Of course, practitioners could learn the application of one of the elements, but even that was rare. Mostly, ki is used in strengthening one's body and weapons. I'll have to check it out with mana. Stuck in the body of a 4-year-old and under constant observation, it's hard to practice. I continued reading and suddenly heard Eleanor's voice. "Bandits! Prepare to attack," she shouted, and footsteps rumbled to the right and behind our cart. "Think of the wind and listen to me. I will protect you." An air barrier. Suddenly, I felt a gust of wind that formed a tornado around me, Mom, and Angela. Then, the wind formed a sphere that surrounded us. Angela held her wand and concentrated on the barrier while arrows flew into it, which, without reaching us, flew off in different directions. My mother pulled me to her, trying to cover anything that might come through with her body. But thanks to Angela, the barrier was pretty strong. In a matter of seconds, the top covering the wagon was torn to shreds and I could see better now. We were surrounded. We were attacked by about 30 bandits. Our position was very disadvantageous because we were surrounded by bandits armed with swords, spears, and other assorted melee weapons. The archers on the right, on the side of the mountain, were aiming, and on the right was only the edge of the trail, with the fog swirling behind it. Jasmine, Durden, and my father seemed to be in one piece, but Elena was sitting on the ground with a pale face as an arrow protruded from her right shin. A bald man, whose face and body were deformed by numerous scars, who resembled a bear, spoke out, "Look who got in. Well done, boys. Keep only the women and child alive. Try to hit them easy. Damaged goods will be harder to sell."